So I thought this might be a good point at which to discuss shadows and how shadows are different depending on how close the object making the shadow is to where the shadow falls. So someone might have been inclined to paint all these shadows the same tone, but we have basically a shadow with a hard edge that is caused by the underside of the weatherboard, and because it's close to the object that is casting the shadow, the edge is quite hard, whereas the shadow cast by the eave, which is a good couple of meters away, the shadow is lighter in tone and the edge is a lot softer because of the interference of light from reflected off the pavement and the wall and so forth. And thirdly, the shadow from our caster, from our sitter, is going to be somewhere in between the dark tone of the shadow under the board and the lighter tone over here, because the sitter is maybe a foot away from where the shadow is falling. So it's going to fall in between these two tones. So we don't want to paint all our shadows the same tone. Also, as this hard-edged shadow moves into the other shadow region, you'll find that it will blend in a lot more than it does in the sunlight. So you want to soften this considerably more. So you see that looks a lot more realistic now. The shadow caused by the eave wants to have a much softer edge to it. So I'm blending that wet on dry into the sunlit area. And then we'll continue to bring across the shadow under the eave into that area. And then fill up this area, and then I'll blend that the same as I did up here. You might also note that my base coat has blue in it and my top coat doesn't. So I haven't added blue to the top coat because I'm just letting the blue of the base coat show through just in subtle ways. And I think that adds a coolness to the shadow without actually adding more blue to the top coat. For these narrow linear blends, just bring your two colours up, or your two tones, I should say, up against each other. like so, and then just start to smudge them together. Just be very soft, just keep going over it. Wipe a little of the excess paint off. Come back, you can even just use your finger to feather the paintbrush out a bit, and then continue to drag it across that join. And you're just feathering the paint together until you're happy with it. And we just go in the opposite direction and then across again. That gives us a nice soft transition. Even though the shadow directly under the weatherboard has a very harder edge than the shadows cast by the eave and the sitter, we still want to soften it slightly. You don't want to have the edge so hard that it's like a drawn line. So with a very small and slightly frayed brush, we're just going to take that very lightly over the edge that we've painted. And this is wet on dry, just to soften that very hard edge. So just be very gentle. And that just takes that very blunt edge away. And you see now I've started working on the sitter's shadow. I've created a tone that is slightly darker than the eave shadow and slightly lighter than the underside of the weatherboard shadow. Again, the edge of the sitter's shadow is going to be somewhere between the hard edge of this shadow and the very soft edge of this shadow, because the sitter is closer to the wall than the eave is to the wall. You don't want to overstate it too much. A person looking at the painting when it's finished might not even notice that these two tones are slightly different. In fact, they probably won't. So there we are, there's our shadow on the wall, pretty much complete. So that is shadows. Remember, they are not objects themselves, they are a product of their surroundings. And the two most important points for shadows were the further from the further away the edge is from the object that casts the shadow, the fuzzier the the edge is going to be. And again, the further away the shadow is from the object that casts it, the more diffuse light can invade that space and lighten the shadow. And remember that shadows can play a good part in a painting. They can add direction, they can accentuate shape and form and composition, and they're quite fun to paint actually. So there you go, that is shadows, and working with tone of course.